Well, that's what I'm coming up here to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the fact that this is one of the many times we come up here and we say, I've got a simple bill for you, right? This isn't a simple bill. This is not easy for anybody. But what I want to remind you of is this. We're here to serve the people back home. Each individual here is serving their people back home. That seat doesn't belong to me. Doesn't belong to James Burchett. District 176 belongs to the people in District 176. It's not about me, and I'm asking you to support this bill and support this map for that very purpose. These districts are drawn in a fair manner. It's fair. What we did on the outset of this is to draw a map that will withstand judicial scrutiny. And coming from one of the 4 pairings in this map, if I can set aside my personal ambitions and my personal feelings to do what's best for the state of Georgia, I think that each and every one of us can do that. I'm appealing to you just from a personal perspective, just to say, hey, this is not about you. This is about the state of Georgia. This is about your constituents. And this is about the future of Georgia. So I'm asking you, please vote yes on this bill. That's all I have. That's all I have to say to you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I may not come back. I do not relish the opportunity to have to run against one of my colleagues. But I'm able to set it aside because I feel confidently that this is what's best for us. So I ask you, please support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the Speaker Pro Tem of this House, Speaker Pro Tem Jones, to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored today to speak in favor of HB 1EX, which accomplishes the federally required redistricting of Georgia House maps to reflect changes in population following the census count. First, I'd like to give a short history. I came in after the Democrat majority House redistricted in 2001, taking office in 2003. I never met many of the Republicans that served in the House in 2002 because they were packed and intentionally paired. As mentioned earlier, 37 out of 74 Republicans were paired. They were packed in districts with a 10% deviation in population. In other words, conservative voices in Georgia were diluted because their districts were diminished, the number of districts, because of that deviation. A federal court struck the map down for violating one man or woman, one vote, as required in the U.S. Constitution. Judges redrew the maps without any regard for incumbency, which resulted in many dim and some R pairings. And I have to say, I remember that period. We kept waiting and waiting for the Democrat majority to produce a map, but they couldn't produce a map that I guess was legal and kept them in charge. And to be a member among 180 waiting for the judges to redraw them was really excruciating, knowing that no public testimony was given, nothing was considered except these federal special masters redrawing it. Well, when the maps came out, they didn't even consider the incumbency. They didn't put dots on the map, unlike Chairman Rich, who asked every member to give her where they lived so we could take it into consideration. After a few decouplings by the judges, you had to be within 1 or 2 precincts of where you were paired and next to an open seat. Ours took the majority for the first time in 140 years in 2005. Next, in the redistricting timeline since I've been here, in 2011, redistricting was performed by with Republican leadership. and the maps were pre-approved by the Obama Justice Department with no changes at all. Not one. Pairings were avoided where possible, and the average population deviation was kept low. Republicans did it right. And now we've arrived at the 2021 redistricting, and I can assure you we're doing it right again. There are no multi-member districts, as the Democrats created to maliciously eliminate Republicans by pairing one Republican in a multi-member district with, say, 3 other Democrats, so they had no chance of winning. The relative average deviation is less than 1% compared with the 10% that Republican districts were given in 2001. The map reflects compliance with the Voting Rights Act, similar to 2011. This is a fair, legal map driven by census-confirmed population shifts. I would like to mention that things are not always as they appear. The only prior House chair of reapportionment still serving in the House, a Democrat who chaired such committee in 2004, failed to report out of committee a legal map, or frankly, a map of any fashion. This followed, of course, the previous Democrat-produced map being struck down in the federal court for violating the U.S. Constitution. The map before you was voted out of committee and complies with federal law. Now I'd like to speak for a minute to the public, those who are watching this streaming. Just want to mention a few things that I've listened to among these many hearings that we've had in reapportionment across the state and here at the Capitol. First, want to mention city versus county splits. With 537 cities in Georgia and a requirement to keep deviations in population size minimal, splits in cities are unavoidable. This map, though, has fewer city splits than the 2011 map. In context, many of you know, but some in the public may not know, counties are constitutional, cities are created by the legislature. The 159 county lines haven't changed in modern history and have always been considered with greater weight in redistricting in Georgia than cities. Many cities change their lines every year through annexations, and there are 72 cities that straddle county lines. Additionally, since 2005, numerous new cities have been created. This is a 10-year map. County lines don't change. Where possible, sure, it's preferable to keep cities together, but when the greater weight is to county lines. I also want to mention to my fellow Georgians that live in Cherokee County, if reelected, I will have the awesome privilege to represent a portion of this tremendous county. And I will work with the other Cherokee representatives to make sure that your priorities are listened to at the Capitol. Other district representatives will also add to the Cherokee team, giving you additional weight at the Capitol. Population increases south of Cherokee County pushed districts north, and it pushed districts south, and you will be the beneficiary. This is very different from 2011, when, for example, the city of Atlanta grew statistically like 1%, 20% this year, and it did push districts in different directions, north and south. I would also like to mention to my fellow Georgians in Coweta County, I heard testimony in the reapportionment committee that was incorrect and misleading. Contrary to what was suggested, we do not have the luxury of leaving districts or county representation unchanged after a census count that saw Georgia grow 10%, over 10%, and, for example, the city of Atlanta by 20%. South Fulton also grew as well. Population growth in compliance with the Voting Rights Act drove changes to Coweta's redistricting, but you will continue to have very strong representation. I must mention that the Democrat House map appears to have significant flaws. I suppose when you know it won't become law and be subject to federal court scrutiny, you can just throw anything on the wall and make it stick. There are significant concerns about the legality of a number of majority black districts in the Democrat-produced map, which has the effect of concentrating where those districts are located. This affected the Coweta and the Fayette County maps that the Democrat majority produced. Coweta residents and Fayette County residents are being gamed by the Democrat majority map. It would not be legal, it would be struck down, and it would be in violation of the Voting Rights Act. If the Democrat majority map were drawn with a straight face, an eye to judicial scrutiny, an expectation that it would actually have the force of law, compliance with the Voting Rights Act, and avoided malicious Republican pairings, the House district maps that they produced would look predominantly similar to the map that you have before you today. I'll close. There are few jobs that state legislators such as ourselves are required to do by the state constitution or federal law. One, we are required to pass a state budget each of every year. And two, we must comply with federal law that says we must redistrict the House, the Senate, and the Congressional districts after a new census count. I cannot emphasize enough, this is a consequential vote. I was here when judges redrew them. I don't want to be here to leave it to judges to redraw them without regard to the testimony we heard, communities of interest, county lines, and trying to create a map that reflects as best as we can what different areas of Georgia want. I encourage you to vote for a map that was fairly drawn, complies with federal law, and fulfills your oath of office to redistrict fairly the various communities in Georgia. And I encourage you to vote favorably for HB 1X. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield the well.
Lady has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We now have a minority report. That will be limited to 20 minutes, and that will be followed by the chair's time of the same length. Chair recognizes for the minority report Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the remaining time that we have to the minority leader. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the distinguished minority leader, Leader Beverly, for the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the chair of the committee, thank you for your effort. I rise in opposition to House Bill 1EX, the Republican map for redistricting the Georgia House of Representatives, because the people of Georgia deserve better. The people of Georgia demanded a fair and transparent redistricting process with the opportunity to review and comment on proposed maps before their consideration by the House. What they got instead was a rushed and secretive process, with the current committee substitute map released just over 1 hour before public comment was scheduled to begin on Monday of this week. Public comment on this map, including from Republicans, was overwhelmingly negative. It was promptly ignored. Republicans voted the map out of committee on partisan lines without making a single change to the map after hearing from the people. That speaks volumes about how little the commitment and the committee valued public feedback, and the people of Georgia deserve better. The people of Georgia deserve a map that complies with the guidelines adopted by the Reapportionment Committee on August 30th but that's not what they got. What they got instead is a Republican map that gives only lip service to the first guideline that requires population equality among the districts. The Republican map deviates from population equality by more than 2.7%, which may not sound like much, but that's almost 50% greater than the current map's deviation when it was enacted in 2015. And it is far higher than the deviation that the Democratic proposal presented this year. Under the Republican map, population equality takes a back seat to partisan purposes, and the people of Georgia deserve better than that. Another guideline requires all maps to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This provision prohibits all forms of racial discrimination in voting, and it ensures racial fairness in the redistricting process. But the Republican map contains fewer opportunity districts for voters of color than the Democratic proposal and intentionally puts two existing opportunity districts at risk, undermining the ability of voters of color to elect candidates of their choice. This is a map that resists the growing diversity of our state rather than reflect it, and the people of Georgia deserve better. The guidelines also say that maps should avoid splitting precincts. That's especially true this year, when election officials have less time than usual to reassign voters to their new districts before the next election cycle. Split precincts are more difficult for election officials, and they raise the cost of elections overall. The Republican map splits 184 precincts, which is far more than necessary. And many of those precincts appear to have been split either for partisan purposes or to harm minority voters. That's unacceptable, and the people of Georgia deserve better. As to communities of interest, the guidelines say to protect communities of interest where possible, but the Reapportionment Committee got an earful from members of the public about how their map fails to do that. For example, the map carves up Coweta County into several pieces and puts rural and frankly Republican-leaning parts of that county into Democratic districts that extend north well into urban parts of Fulton County. When asked why she did that, the committee chair said that it was necessary to comply with other guidelines. But our map, the Democratic map, shows that it wasn't necessary to do that. We kept Coweta County intact. And while we're happy to make new friends down in Noonan, we also respect their desire to have a representative with whom they see more eye to eye. And the Republican map doesn't do that. The people of Georgia deserve better. The Republican map also violates the guidelines by pairing incumbents unnecessarily. Their map pairs two Democratic representatives where? In Gwinnett County, the county that saw the largest population growth in Georgia since the last census, despite the fact that there's an open seat nearby that either one of them could have been drawn easily into those districts. This is a perfect example of politicians using their power in the redistricting process to settle some personal or political grudge rather than to benefit the public good. That's not right. It undermines public confidence in our democracy, and the people of Georgia deserve better. Now, I want the people of Georgia to know that there is a better map available. It's out there. It's on the website. But the rules of this body are structured so that we cannot even bring it to the floor. We cannot offer it as an amendment. It will not get a vote. If it did, it just might pass. The better map, my friends, is the map produced by the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. Our map, which was developed with careful consideration and input from stakeholders, demonstrates the Democratic Party's commitment to fair, transparent, and an inclusive redistricting effort. Our map incorporates feedback from both the Georgia House Democratic Caucus statewide listening tour, and the Reapportionments Committee joint hearings that took place over the summer. Our map also reflects Georgia's diverse population and changing population trends within the state. I'm confident that it's the best map available for all of the people of Georgia. Our map began with an analysis of how Georgia's population has shifted over the last decade. That analysis showed that counties in Southwest Georgia, South Central Georgia, and Northwest Georgia together lost more population relative to the state. So those areas had to lose a representative. Our analysis also showed that the Atlanta metro area has gained enough population relative to the state to make up 4 whole House districts. So our map adds 4 districts there. One of the new districts in our map, by the way, is located in Forsyth County, which experienced tremendous growth over the last decade. Now, much to my chagrin, that new district is likely to be won by a Republican, given the political leanings of Forsyth County. But the Democratic map drew it anyway because that's what the population trends dictated. Pure and simple, our map does not play the kind of political games that you see in the Republican map. Our map also takes population equality seriously and results in a much lower deviation than either the Republican or the current map. Our map complies with the Voting Rights Act. In order to be sure about that, we hired an expert statistician. His name, Dr. Stephen Popick, who worked in the voting section of the Department of Justice under both George W. Bush and the Obama administrations to perform racial block voting analysis for Georgia's elections. Dr. Popick found what I think we all know, that voting in Georgia is highly polarized along racial lines, and that Section 2 therefore requires us to protect voters of color when we draw our maps. The committee chair says that she hired a statistician who found essentially the same thing, but we don't know who that is. As a result, our map carefully avoids dismantling any district in which minority voters currently have an opportunity to elect the candidates of their choice. And it creates 3 new opportunity districts that reflect the tremendous growth in Georgia's diversity over the last decade. The Democratic map also splits fewer precincts than the Republican map, preserves the core of existing districts, and avoids pairing incumbents unnecessarily because of the dramatic shifts in Georgia's population over the last decade. Throughout our map, the changes we proposed were dictated by the population and the guidelines, and not by trying to secure an advantage for one group or one faction over another. That's what we heard Georgians demanding, so that's what we tried to do. And our map didn't even get a chance to have a vote. Our map reflects communities of interest like the one in Coweta and in the one in Athens, Clarke County. You know, when Reapportionment Committee met this summer in July, witness after witness complained about the way the current map splits their county into 3 pieces and leaves them represented by legislators beholden to constituencies outside of Clarke County that have little in common with the voters in Athens. We listen. Our map, that is the Georgia House Democratic Caucus map, ensures that voters of Athens-Clarke will be able to elect at least 2 members of the House, while the Republican map, the fragmentation was worse. They had more, and they said there was going to be 4. Our map didn't get a chance to be voted on. It's as though the Republicans weren't even listening to you, Georgia. You deserve better than that. We listened. The Georgia House Democratic Caucus listened. With your help, we produced a map that we think is the best plan for all Georgians, but we didn't even get a vote. Our choice today is a vote yes or no on the Republican map, which pales in comparison to ours. That's why I'm voting no. on House Bill 1EX and why I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
We're going on now to the chairman's time. 20 minutes for the chair's time. The chair recognizes the chairman of the committee, Chairman Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I want to take this time to clarify and correct a number of misstatements that have been made earlier in these presentations. First of all, with respect to our timeline, we have been attacked for supposedly rushing this process. The truth is, we have been working through this process since the summer to learn about the communities of interest, to speak with members, and to hear from members of the public. As soon as the data arrived, we began in earnest drawing the maps. We published and made public our first draft of the map over a week ago. It was posted on the website. It was made available to not only all of the members of this House, but also all of the members of the public. That map, that first draft, had taken into account all of the public comment that we had received through our public hearings across the state, through our written portal, and it also had taken into account information about individual districts and communities of interest that members of this body had shared with me. Unfortunately, members of the Democratic caucus had been apparently advised to not meet with me. A few did. These are their files. Every single one of them shared with me information about their districts and their communities of interest. And that was taken into account and was drawn into the map that was released over a week ago. Contrast that with the Democrat member who stopped me after yesterday's vote in committee on this bill to tell me that she has a community of interest and that the map doesn't take it into account. That is something that would have been very helpful for her to share with me over the summer in one of those 88+ hours that I had made available. That would have been something that would have been very helpful for her to share with me over the last week, as have many members here, Republican and Democrat. We have taken into account commentary that we have received from you all over the last week, and where we could, we have implemented those changes. But that person never came to me. That person didn't even show up at any of the 3 committee hearings that I had. Never testified, never spoke up, never emailed me. In addition to the 88+ hours that I made available in the 4 separate emails that went out to every member of this body, I also offered to meet with each and every one of you at any other time if none of those times that I suggested were convenient for you. Some people did take me up on that. Most Democrats didn't, and that's unfortunate for their districts and for their constituents. Interestingly, the Democrats' own attorney at our committee testified that it is impossible to determine a community of interest by looking at a map. The only way to determine a community of interest is to learn about that community, to speak to the people in that community, and who better than the representatives who represent those communities and those districts. So thank you to all of you who did right by your constituency and shared with me information about your communities of interest. The work that I did this summer and that the other members of our committee did this summer was not in vain. It was very useful. It's part of our guidelines. Speaking of those guidelines, one of the representatives who spoke earlier today had a problem with the guidelines, thought they should be something different. Well, that's the first I've heard of that. I didn't hear a motion to amend. I didn't hear anybody even ask that we consider a different guideline or that we change any of the guidelines. Just a straight no vote. It would have been nice to have that information. We still actually haven't heard what other guidelines we should be employing. Also interesting is that the only bill that is before you today that has gone through the committee process, which is the process that we perfect legislation, is this bill. No other redistricting plan has gone through the process. I heard that it didn't have a chance. Nobody asked that there be a vote on that bill. We had a hearing, we had public commentary. I had no request that that bill be voted on. I also thought it was interesting that this process is supposedly being rushed when everybody knows we have deadlines. We have deadlines. As was acknowledged by the minority leader, the elections officials are going to have to rush to implement these maps, this new data. They have a lot of work to do. We have a job to get done now. And we also, very interestingly, have provided the most public input and time on the map consideration that I could find in the record for this House. In 2001, this was the timeline. August 14th, 2001, the maps were revealed in committee. They were voted on in committee. August 15th, the maps were voted on the floor, the House floor. August 16th, they were voted on in the Senate committee, the House maps. August 17th, they were voted out of the Senate. That is quite a clip compared to the over 1 week that we have been looking at this map and that we have been hearing from the public, that we have received over 900 comments, 3 committee hearings, 2 days of public testimony. Everybody who came got a chance to talk. And we have implemented the input that we received, the input that was appropriate, the input that was possible to still comply with the law. We also heard talk about cities. Cities, I learned, as you heard from the Speaker Pro Tem, are quite a different jurisdictional boundary than counties. Counties are defined by the Constitution. They don't change. City boundaries do change. Something else that's very interesting, we have 500 cities. 500 cities in this state. 74 of those cities straddle county lines. Well, guess what? Precincts are drawn by the counties within county lines. It is impossible to respect every city boundary. But that is something that we considered. It wasn't a requirement in our guidelines. It is not something that has ever been considered before, but we did, and we have minimized city splits. Ask your Democrat colleagues in Smyrna and Marietta and Valdosta and Johns Creek. Ask them. We have done what we could to minimize those. But this is a talking point that is designed to mislead, and I am imploring you to look at the facts. There was mention that we have split 184 precincts. I do not think that anybody made that up, but I do have to correct the record here. We have not split 184 precincts. I don't know the number, but it is definitely less than that. And the number, the report that was given and the number that you heard was based upon old precincts from 2018. In drawing our maps, we used the 2020 precincts. So running a 2018 report is going to give false information and result in a higher number of precinct splits. That was inadvertent, but I felt like I had to correct the record there. Something else that has been concerning to me, I learned through some social media posts after the fact, but then my information was filled in during the committee process, that the Democratic caucus had formal town halls, apparently all across the state, wherein they heard from members of the public. I, as the chair of this committee, was not invited to any of those. I was not even informed of any of those, and neither was any of the other Republican members on my committee with whom I have spoken. It's concerning to me also that none of the information that was gathered at those town halls was shared with me or the committee. If that information were so important, why wouldn't that information be shared with us? Again, I'm just concerned that there are some smoke and mirrors, as I heard my maps described. These maps that we have worked on with the Redistricting Office and with legal counsel, who is much more learned in this area of the law than I am. These maps are smoke and mirrors. I'm concerned that some of the commentary that you heard from those opposing the bill today is a lot of smoke and mirrors. I want to address also the racially polarized voting analysis. In committee, I was asked if we had conducted a racially polarized voting analysis, and I answered that yes, we have, and that the result was that there was a finding of racially polarized voting. I could not remember the name of the professor who conducted that. I asked for it sitting here, and I have again forgotten the name. I do remember that he is a professor of political science from the University of Texas. He is not a statistician. We went and got the gold standard here, and we retained a political scientist to conduct that analysis. We did request during the committee meeting, when we learned that the Democratic caucus had retained or had a statistician conduct a racially polarized voting analysis, we requested a copy of that and we were denied it. Again, information that apparently is important, but that we were denied. I want to reiterate that this is a map that complies with the law. First and foremost, we comply with the United States Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. Then we complied with the guidelines that the committee adopted. The map is fair to Georgia. As an elected Republican woman from Gwinnett County, I'm very proud of the number of minority opportunity districts that we have drafted here. My family, my children, and I have benefited greatly from our diverse community. We have had a rich experience. And now I know that my neighbors, my friends, my children's friends, and their parents, they all have an opportunity to do what I'm doing here too. Our maps have ensured that. Our maps are representative of our state. And I would request a favorable vote on House Bill 1EX. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Mr. Clerk, you want to ring the bell? Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 1EX will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 1EX, the ayes are 99, the nays are 79. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. For what purpose does Chairman Rich rise?
Is it not working? I'd like to make a motion for immediate transmittal to the Senate.
The chairman has moved that House Bill 1EX be immediately transmitted to the Senate. Is there objection? Chair hears none, and it is on its way across the hall. The clerk will read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions.
Honoring the life and memory of James Clifford Charlie Griswold. Recognizing and commending the Georgia Hispanic Construction Association. Recognizing March 23rd, 2021 as Pakistan Resolution Day. Commending Kathy Hord on the grand occasion of her 70th birthday. Recognizing September 18th, 2021 as Positive American Youth Day. Commending and congratulating Adam Criswell Kenworthy. Commending and congratulating Jack Stewart Burrows. Commending and congratulating Edward John Aarons III, and for other purposes. That completes the reading of the privilege resolution.
Is there any objection to adopting the privilege resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. We have one more first reader. Clerk will read the bill, caption of the bill.
Senate Resolution Number 5EX by Senator Dixon the 45th, Goodman of the 8th, Hatchett of the 50th, Anderson the 24th, and Strickland of the 17th, ratifying Governor Brian P. Kemp's executive orders and suspending the collection of motor fuel and diesel fuel taxes.
Ways and Means. We have one announcement. The chair recognizes the chairman of the Higher Education Committee, Chairman Martin, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, on the House Higher Ed Committee, I just wanted to remind everyone we were scheduled to meet at 1 o'clock today. We're still going to meet. Let's get together and get over there by 1:10. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to get there, but we'll try to convene that meeting at 1:10, CLOB 606. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
We have a birthday today, and it's going to be a hot time in the old town tonight. Help me wish a happy birthday to the chairman of the Regulated Industries Committee, Chairman Alan Powell. Chair recognizes Chairman Darlene Taylor for an announcement.
Notice, please, we have a legislative and congressional redistricting meeting today at 4:30 in CLOB 406. Thank you.
I think that now completes the announcements. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader of the House for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that this House stand adjourned until 9:30 a.m. Friday, November the 12th, 2021.
The House will be adjourned tomorrow so that people may observe and pay respect to our nation's veterans. The motion of the Majority Leader is that this House be adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Friday, November 12. All those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, and this House is adjourned until Friday at 9:30 a.m.